Elias Dummer, man, it is such an honor to have you back on the Beyond Sunday podcast. I know you've
Thanks,
been on the
man.
show. It's been years, but
Yes.
excited to connect and to dive into some stuff. Man, you are somebody that I so look up to and respect. Not only your music and your artistry, but the thoughtfulness with which you serve the church and your ministry and your work with worship leader research, just helping us navigate this complicated ecosystem that is local
Yes.
church worship and worship industry. And you've been in all facets of it, from the industry side and the songwriting side to the local church side. So anyway, man, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm doing great. It's good to see your face again.
Yeah, man, this is going to be a lot of fun. So I want to start with this, Elias. For our listeners that don't know, you're a part of I guess it's an organization or a team with worship leader research,
A team.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I want you to talk to us about that. Maybe what's the most eye-opening discovery that you found in your research with worship leader research?
Yeah. So we started worship leader research mostly out of existing relationship. Like we were some friends who worked together or had met over the years. Myself, I've run a marketing agency for now 17 years. Although people don't realize that. If they know me by name, they probably know my music or my work as a worship artist or recording artist, or my band, the City Harmonic, which had pretty good spell. So, I've done a few things in that regard, but often with the background of having sat across the table from CEOs and CMOs and different people in making big marketing decisions. So for me, it was always surprising, the ways that we would spiritualize things that were decisions made in a boardroom. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just the way we would talk about it would sort of automatically baptize business things we would do. And
Right.
so I was friends with sort of some research academics along the way, some theologians who were engaged in this sort of thing. My friends Mike Tapper and Mark Joliker had some work that looked at the shelf life of worship songs. So, for example, we've seen that worship, and you probably talked to them, and if you haven't, you've heard of it
I
certainly.
have, yep.
Yeah, so the shelf life of worship songs essentially went from like 10 years to 3, and now it's shorter. And I mean, you can see that even now by how rarely the blessing is played today.
Very
So
true. Interesting.
that was like, if you think that was everything for a short spell and is gone for all intents and purposes. Not to say that people that's not meaningful to people, not to say that that churches don't use it somewhere, but if you look at the charts, so to speak, it came and went, right? And that
Yep.
didn't used to be true. And so they had done that work and it was well published. And then they were looking at what to do next. And we started talking and they pulled some friends together, and I'm part of that team, sort of acting as a person with experience on all fronts, and particularly I think as well with the marketing space. So yeah, the first thing we did was look at the CCLI data for 10 years. So we looked at 2010 through the end of 2019. And in that, we found that in that window of time, and I'll admit this was pretty surreal because that covers the window of time in which my band kind of peaked, you know? So it's a strange thing to look at data around it all.
Right.
But what we found was that our first headline made a lot of headlines, which was that 100% of the top 25 songs in the CCLI chart that were new songs in that window of time either were directly or indirectly popularized by the big four, which is Bethel, Passion, Elevation, and Hillsong.
Yep.
So even folks like Phil Wickham, even folks like David Leonard, who directly said this in an article of ours, like he's the one saying it himself. Yeah, if not for them, this wouldn't have happened. You know, that these songs were essentially all tied to these movements. What's interesting is that what that doesn't mean is that these movements wrote these songs. What
Yep.
it means is that worship leaders at the local level are looking to these four movements with whatever intention that they have or aspiration that they have, and using them essentially as an earmark for songs which can be
That's right.
trusted. And that's the ultimate outcome is not what people think it is. It's not that these four megachurches are writing all these songs. the data doesn't necessarily say that, although they have a big chunk of it.
Well, I can think of so, like, you mentioned David Leonard and "Great Are You, Lord." So, that song is a phenomenon, um,
Yeah.
and but I don't know the full story behind it, but I'd imagine it was because one of these big movements, maybe Bethel, started to lead that song, and that's what helped it kinda
Yeah,
catch
because
wildfire, is that
you've got organizations which have a media empire built around them, either direct to consumer or otherwise. Well, what's gonna happen if that song starts to be serviced right to people's houses 3, 4 weeks in a row for a television audience or an internet streaming audience of millions? What's gonna happen? It's not that complicated in a way, right? So the question is, to what extent are the people who are making decisions at other local churches looking to those local churches to drive and guide the sorts of things they should be ahead of?
Mm, yeah. It's fascinating. What
Mhm.
so in that particular kinda world of the Big 4, talk about, because I know that's you're just stating facts, like, this is kind of why things are the way they are, and when you just sort of objectively look at it, it's like, well, that makes sense. What are some of the dangers or traps in how we kinda navigate this whole thing as worship leaders?
Well, I think part of it is whether or not we're doing so with a kind of strictly aspirational quality to it. I had a church planter, just personal opinion, of course, but I had a friend once say that, when you're planting a church, the last thing you want to do is hate the church you have in favor of the church you wish you had. Right.
Mm,
And the reality is that these are institutions, very often multi site institutions. If not multi site, they are almost certainly multi service, and they're very complex organizations. That, if I think of my own city, where you couldn't build a mega church physically in Hamilton if you wanted to, like there's just not, you'd have to knock down buildings to the cost of millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's completely infeasible to plant a church of that scale here in our city, right?
yep,
So the idea that that could port here is somewhat silly, right? So of course there's, our relationship to standards and our relationship to the question of excellence and all kinds of stuff like that factors in. Um, but I think, like, we kind of have to know our place in geographical terms, like to know our own people, to know our own place, and to know what suits. And to me, I might sound like an old curmudgeon, but coming up, I started leading worship in the '90s and then came up through the 2000s,
yep,
and in
me
that
too.
window of time, um, you would hear a song. I'd hear a Passion song or a Chris Tomlin song or whatever, and we would automatically interpret that song because it sort of predated the era of multi-tracks. And so we could play a set list of 5 songs, and they could come from 5 or 6 different contexts. But because they were being contextualized by players interpreting the music by necessity, it sounded like a cohesive set list. So I
Yep,
think what we have today instead is a sort of aligning and filtering process that happens based on sonic and aesthetic choices made at that church level among the big 4. So Hillsong songs don't sound like Bethel songs most of the time.
mhm,
And so what you have is, if you're a church that's reliant on tracks, and you're reliant on certain production choices, and I'm not anti-track, we use it in my band all the time. If that's something that's central to your DNA, and most of what that looks like is pulling in existing masters from these churches and then applying them at the local level, you're going to be listening to new songs through that lens, which is not really a great way to make decisions, because you could otherwise, whether we relied less on them or we had more customization of tracks or whatever, you could have a lot more freedom to choose songs that suit you rather than productions that suit you. And so there's
yep,
a whole bunch of ways in which, like, the outcome of the last 6, 7 years, I think since 2017 in particular, has been that more and more and more and more of the decision making and the sort of incentives in worship music have to do with the recorded master and less to do with the written song.
yep. Yeah, so true. Elias, I yeah, I've been posting the last few weeks, just some concerns, right? You've
Sure, yeah.
worship
Worship.
industry, worship tours, worship nights, like, and I know, like, you just came off a worship tour, and
I
uh,
fully regret calling it that, to tell you the truth.
no, I mean, I'm not critiquing, I'm not judging
No,
you.
no, I
I'm
fully regret calling it that. I'm not kidding. I'm not.
why do you regret calling it that?
I didn't really wanna call it that in the first place, and the reason is I think we need cleaner lines.
Okay,
Like, there is a degree in which, and I get this about, like, the subject of performance and different things like that too, where we use words in a way that is less helpful than we think, and then we end up creating these boogeymen that actually just sort of make talking about worship this existential crisis all of the time. And I think, like, at the end of the day, if I'm coming from my place in a van or a bus or whatever, and I'm showing up in your city and I'm playing songs, mostly mine, whatever, I'm playing songs that you paid money to see, it is a concert. It is absolutely a concert. Now, is it a concert in which we might play worship songs? Yes. Is it a concert in which we might choose to worship together? Yes. But it is ultimately a concert. I don't know these people. Even if I'm in relationship with the church, I have no accountability. There's no mutual accountability. It
right.
is an elevated, entertaining, and moving and all kinds of things experience.
Yes.
So we end up with these kind of weird ideas or weird tensions around entertainment, which is inevitable in music. Hopefully, you're doing something that people like to hear. So if you really
Right.
boil it
Yeah.
down, worship music ought to be entertaining because you want to not, it's not brushing your teeth. Like, you want it to be moving and meaningful.
Right. The answer isn't making it less, like, worse quality and more boring. Like, that's not the direction.
That's not the direction. The direction is framing. It's so much of this is about the language we use around and in the subject of worship. Like, whether it's around performance or whether it's around a tour, or whether, and so much of that stems from one really, really big theological idea, which is that, like, the boogeyman in worship's closet is kind of this dualistic idea. We're essentially afraid of human enterprise and human agency, and we're afraid of the mundane. So, like, that boils into every level of what we do in worship music and how we talk about worship music and how we talk about successful songs and all that, anointing, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're afraid of the idea, even though this is like Christianity Gospel 101. We're afraid in the worship world of, like, a normal thing having good outcomes, a mundane thing being used by God without having to say, well, that's magical now. God must have done that as an exception to the norm in order
Yeah.
to justify its existence at all. And so, like, the worship tours thing is a little bit of that, and a little weirder in that, like, there are certain churches that will take basically their show on the road, so to speak, and come in and charge tickets. And I'd say that's like another level of probably discomfort, like uncomfortable for me. But in general, I just think we're all better off if we call it a concert, call it a tour, call it what it is. We are recording artists. We recorded a certain kind of song for a certain
Yeah.
kind of purpose, but that doesn't mean that it's not a concert. And
Yeah.
calling it something which I think steps on the local church doesn't help the local church, no matter if we put resourcing in our vision statement or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there should be something that distinguishes ministries and local churches, right? And I get it, like, you're on Instagram for 5 minutes, and everybody is just branding and monetizing and growing, every movement. I mean, that's why you, and maybe this is overly critical, like, that's why you would go on sort of a tour, is the money that is behind it. And I know we can kind of say, "Hey, this is a ministry," and I totally get that. Like, we're going and we're gonna provide, like, a top-notch, incredible worship experience for people, and their lives can be changed. That can happen. That's happened for me in these spaces. But it's almost like, should we be, like, distinguish ourselves more so than just this business enterprise, like you said, media empire, and just chasing more dollars? Like, What I'm asking is there a better way for us to have healthier worship cultures and to communicate and invest in worship leaders in local churches rather than just taking the show on the road for everybody to experience? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think though that though even the big four we're talking about are already starting to respond that way, to be fair.
Okay.
Like you're already seeing fewer, that's not to say it's unilateral, but you're already seeing fewer, say, for example, Bethel Music and more Josh Baldwin.
Mhm.
You're already seeing a sort of pivot back to the artist level. And I think there was this phenomenon where coming out of the rise of certain movements in the late 90s, right? We sort of worship leaders looked to the church as a shortcut where everyone, the average guy locally is overworked, has no time. He's got choices to make, too many songs. The volume of music being released went up. And so what do? You look to gatekeepers because otherwise you go crazy.
Yeah.
No one has enough hours in the day to listen to that much music, right? And so the people who have movements that are sort of similar to what you wish your church might be like, of course you're going to look to them to that end, right? Of
Right.
course. So it, it's tricky in that like we want to sort of moralize how it got where it is. And there might be some qualities to that that we could, but at the end of the day, I think like really it comes down to what do we at the local level want?
Yeah.
Like, what is it we're trying to do? And what do we think a good or healthy or successful worship ministry is? Because it
Yeah.
shouldn't surprise us that the like thing that we do is shaped by the mechanisms that help us encounter it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like Spotify streaming distribution, the media, the changes in from CD to streaming and so on and so on and so on and so on. It should never surprise us that the means by which we find a thing is impacting how it works.
Yep. Yep.
And yet we're often surprised by that, you know?
Yeah. Well, I love what you're doing with worship leader research because essentially what you're trying to do is to educate people so that they can navigate this landscape with just a biblical perspective, understanding, like you're saying, all these clear lines, because the industry isn't going to form those clear lines for you. And I don't think like the industry isn't gonna change, like, the big names out there, I mean, they're gonna do their thing, but we on the receiving end of that can either just sit back and become gluttons for the entertainment of it all, or we can biblically frame all of this and take the good and and, spit out the bones, so to speak, of what's maybe not helpful to us in our local context. But I think a lot of people are just sort of swept up in the emotion for it.
And vice
Think a
versa,
little more
swept up into
critically.
the debate, right? Like they'll
Yeah.
get really caught
Yeah.
up in like a essentially reductive version of the argument, which is like,
Yep.
oh, they
Yep.
must be evil, doing evil things and forcing them
Right.
upon me.
Right.
And I hate to say it,
Yep.
it's like that's not how algorithms work, bro. Like if you're
Yeah.
if you're seeing a bunch of this stuff on Instagram, guess what you've been watching? You know?
Right. Right.
Like that's kind of how it
Yes.
goes. So so it is
Yep.
one of those things where it's like, look, like I'm not anti those people at all.
No
It's
way.
just
No
at
way.
the end of the day, like I have to say, well, what is my church like? What's good for my church? What's good for my people? And do that in a
Yeah.
healthy way. And I
Yes.
think on every level, like I was saying earlier, this thing about dualism, essentially, like I think that we want worship leaders, worship leading, the making of worship music, the writing of worship music to all be more special and mysterious than it is. And don't hear me saying that it's not sacred,
Right.
that it
Right.
isn't, but that there isn't some seriousness to that.
Mhm.
There is
Mhm.
some seriousness in terms of like we're putting words in people's mouths. We're giving them a prayer to pray by song, you know? But at the same time, we then want to kind of do this constant borrowing of God's authority. So if a song succeeded, even if that song succeeded by illegally scraping emails through Facebook ads in the early 2010s, we want to say it's anointed by God to do so.
Right.
Like
Right.
we can't just say, no, it's a great song. despite the fact that there's no New Testament examples of an abstract anointing and the word is only ever applied to the church at large. Like there's this kind of like we have these gaps and we just fill them with God all of the time. And if we don't understand an industry, we spiritualize the industry.
Yeah.
And of
Yes.
course that's convenient for the people who happen to be at the top of that industry.
Oh, it's so
It's
frustrating
so
though.
frustrating though. Yeah. But but I'm not but it's not like I'm entitled to anyone's ears. I'm not entitled to anyone's money. You know, it's like it's not like it would just be equally distributed because no marketing vertical is equally distributed. There's always two players. In fact, we're lucky in worship music that there's four.
Yeah.
You know, so it is this kind of strange thing when you start to look at how businesses and popularity tend to work, and you're just like, hey, you know what? It could be way worse than it is in worship music, but we're not powerless at the local level, provided that we start to talk about these things as in simple, straightforward terms,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that goes all the way
Yep.
for me. That goes all the way down into
Agreed.
like what it means to experience worship music in a church, what it means to engage in the business. All of it isn't not spiritual to talk about business in business terms. It isn't not spiritual to acknowledge that we're impacted by market forces because we are humans who are part of culture. And
Right.
that's just
Right.
a thing that exists in the world. And
Yep.
the more comfortable
Yep.
we become with that, I think the healthier all of this gets.
Yeah. In part, I mean, we are not even the
Yeah. In
consumer
part, I mean, we
isn't
are not
off the
even
hook here.
the
Like a
consumer
worship
is
Right.
isn't
industry
off the hook
exists
here. Like
because
a
we
worship
want it.
industry exists because we want it. We love it.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we
Right.
eat it up.
Right.
And so I agree. I think it needs more specific, clearer lines drawn. Let's call it what it is. Let's not remove God from the equation
That's right.
entirely because God is working in mysterious ways. But there are also really top-notch marketing people who are involved in these movements that know the algorithms and are, I don't want to, exploiting is probably a bad word to use, but they are utilizing that to their advantage.
Yeah, and if you were in that job, I think you would too. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like if you're given a task in a church or in an organization, good stewardship is trying to do that well and ethically. And
Right.
so it is a challenging thing to admit, but that is the world that we're in. I mean, I think of this example a bunch of years ago we traveled down to Guatemala with World Vision and they were showing us different projects that they were working on. And one of the things that they had done was help a local guy and his family make a sort of de facto candle factory, right? Well, guess who the largest buyer of candles is in their area? Well, it's the local Catholic diocese.
Hmm.
So, of course, one of the things which was lifting 18, 20 families out of poverty was the demand and the regular demand for candles in the Catholic Church nearby. So we can't have it both ways, you know? And so part of what we want to do when we see problems like this, or we feel like there's inequities forming, which I think there are, right? When we look at these things, we then say, well, it must be broken, tear it all down. Instead of going, okay, what if I come to understand the thing and then we can name specific problems, specific changes, specific things we could do in
Yep.
various parts of the machine and
Yep.
then correct that. It's just easier as humans to jump into our biases and find a villain and then justify our own inaction.
Yep. So for example, Elias, let's take like worship songs. Okay, that there is a demand. There is an industry and a demand for great worship songs. Churches sing worship songs every day, every Sunday. And uh so what are some other ways that we can go about this other than just looking to the big four, which most people do? It's what's popular, what's top 10 CCLI. They're looking at what are other churches doing. But in my mind, I'm like, I would love to see more local songwriters. Now, just because a local church writes their own songs doesn't mean they're good songs, right? There
Right.
needs to
Yeah.
be skillful
I think that's a pretty
writing.
big part of this.
Yes. Right? Yeah, because these
professional songwriter. They're very good songwriters and they're writing very good songs, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't more people in their local context that can write great songs, or other fringe movements that are writing great songs that are just nobody's paying attention to. Anyway, thoughts on that and just how we approach the songs that we pick for Sunday.
Yeah, man. Um, well, I'd say a couple things. One, I think we have to remember what we have to define what we believe worship songs are for.
Mm.
And I think like if worship songs are formative, so they are a discipleship tool, they're prayerful, hopefully they're earnest and authentic and grounded in the way that the Psalms are, in my view, at least, earthier than probably we want than we allow them to be a lot of the time. Um, well, those songs, for them to really work in us, if like what we're doing when we sing at church is principally formational rather than say principally experiential, you know, although the
Mm.
experience forms us, but you know what I'm saying. Um,
Sure.
the then actually a whole bunch more new songs doesn't help. Probably what's going on, or probably what needs to happen, is actually fewer new songs and
There
more
are
time.
so many new
So many.
songs.
Now, and there are good reason. There's a good reason for that. So fewer new songs that we spend more, but instead spending more time with the songs that we have, and
Mhm.
or more time with fewer new songs is probably what's needed in terms of big picture, what's good for local churches. But that's not the reason that we don't have a million new worship songs because there are a million slots for songs on Sundays, right? We have a million
Right.
new worship songs because the incentives since the advent of streaming have slowly been moving away from song publishing and towards songs recordings. We're listening to more worship music than ever.
Yep.
And so even as a writer, I the idea that I have a new, church writ large, revolutionary, God-given theological preposition to offer you, that I have 12 of those in a year is absurd. But that's the pressure that we put on these worship writers if we assume that everything they do is intended for our congregation,
Yeah.
right? And so I think we need to give everybody the credit, including ourselves, but the big four included, of saying like, hey, you're allowed to just write songs that might be devotional, might be whatever. And we don't have to assume that everything that gets shoveled to us, even if it's fun to listen to, is for our church.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah,
that
makes sense.
part of it is like the fuzzy categories, you know, of like
Yep.
worship music being for churches. I don't think that's true anymore. I think worship music is its own listening category now.
Yeah.
And we have to then define at the local level, well, what does that mean for what we sing together? Right. And that gets
I think
really complicated in all kinds of ways.
it does, and I feel like we've gotten a little bit lazy where as church, and this is a blanket statement, and this isn't every church, but we've gotten locked into a certain like worship experience that works. There's a template for the kinds of songs, the sort of sonic quality, the sort of instrumentation, the highs and the lows within our songs, the peaks and the valleys, and like we're kind of obsessed with what works, and so we copy and paste because hey, that's working there. We know we'll get the same result here because we can do that here. But I think personally, I think that's just leaving a lot of nuance and creativity off of the table for what our worship experiences can be like because we're so locked into sounding and looking like Bethel or Hillsong or Passion that we miss out on more like just different worship opportunities. Does that make sense?
Oh, oh yeah, totally. I mean, and I think there's a few ways in which that's true. There's a couple things I'd probably push back on.
Yeah.
Um, the way in which I think it's true is just like, should our local church be idiosyncratic? And the answer is yes, because it's comprised of people who live in a place. Like, I think, and it's even true of our, this is maybe a slightly dated example, but like, if you look at U2, part of what makes U2 shine as a band is the fact that their bass player is very meat and potatoes.
Mm.
Like the edge does what the edge does. But the reason that the edge has room to do all of that is that someone very basic is sitting there holding it down.
Yep.
Right. And so you can't go 11 out of 10 on all cylinders all of the time. And I think what's happening in a lot of these big churches is you have the top tier of talent being pulled up, or at least someone's organizing it into a top tier of talent as a presentation. And you end up with this kind of expectation that that's what needs to happen all the time. And I think what's the reality is we lose the spirit of our local congregation by trying too hard to sound like some other place. And that's complicated. There's monoculture, there's all kinds of things shaping over time what that means to us. I mean, one of the funny things about touring now versus say 15 years ago is that like the bougie coffee shop in every city is fundamentally the same.
Yeah.
That didn't used to be true. So there's a myriad of ways in which what we're seeing play out in the church is actually playing out at large,
Mm.
where because of social media, we do have a bit more of a monoculture, but it's not
Yep.
total. You know what I mean? There are local and personal idiosyncrasies that we should lean into and rather than away from. And I think that's probably where we could use a correction as the church is trusting our people to be themselves to a degree.
How do we do that though? I feel like we're just so swept up into what everybody else is doing. What are some
Yeah, I
ways
mean, I
that
think
we can tap into our own unique culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a wide variety in how things like say multi-tracks are used, and there's a lot of churches that don't use them at all. And so for those churches, they are doing it probably. Like
Yeah.
I think of the presentation of a song. If you're using multi-tracks and you're doing your best to reproduce the original recording, I should hope that your church culture is identical to the church that produced it, and that your players don't have stylistic. If you're just leaning into like, hey, we're the local Hillsong. I mean, that might be cool from a certain measurement growth metric, but like it doesn't say anything about your people finding their own voice and it becoming sort of the street as much as it is open doors to the street, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's kind of that part of it. To me, I do think, and actually I'll say with City Harmonic, we took for granted that at the local church, like when we arranged our songs, we did not think about whether Jim down the road was going to play it the same way. We did not, and that maybe, might have been a commercial mistake,
Mm.
that like we
Missed
didn't
opportunity.
prioritize. Yeah, well, we didn't prioritize making it sound like something which would fit into their existing worship set when we
Yeah.
arranged our records.
You were being
right?
yourself.
We were being ourselves. And the
Yep.
songs translate just very well, but people hear arrangements and they think of the arrangement and they say, well, that doesn't sound like us now, therefore we can't do it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's probably a whole bunch of more minor ways in which that's playing out at the local level. So I do think using multi-track differently could be a really healthy start. If
Cutting
you're gonna
back a little bit.
cutting back to use things that fill out what you are rather than use things to be more similar to what they did. It's
Yeah,
a
that's
great
well said.
tool, but using it to just be them doesn't help your people. Doesn't help your people need to see themselves on stage. We're image bearing. We're reflecting God to one another. We're doing like the angels are in heaven, right? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God. This isn't to God. This isn't vertical. Heaven isn't even described that way. So that language is a bit silly. We're saying it to one another and to God together. And so that same thing could play out on every level in our worship presentations on Sunday.
Yeah, like multi-tracks. I love the people at multi-tracks. Like that's a great tool that resources
Yeah,
a lot of
great tool.
churches, but eventually it becomes like we're serving the tool rather than the tool like serving us.
Right.
And
Yes.
I would love
if we're choosing not to play a song because of how the master sounds, then as at the local level, we haven't thought through, are we using our people? How are we doing this? What's it gonna like?
Yep.
It instead needs to be like, what is this song saying, doing? The basic components of the song and it's most stripped down. Can my team make this their own and then make a cohesive set list that way? I think we'd see a lot more diversity if we did it that way. I really do.
Yeah. Elias, I want you to talk a little bit about I saw a video that you did once just about like emotionally is worship music emotionally manipulative? And I love one of the things you said was we are shepherds, not shamans. And I wondered if you could just touch on that for us a little bit because I thought it was really insightful because I think that is used sort of as a critique against worship music is, well, you're just manipulating my emotions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, all music is emotionally manipulative. So the problem
Yeah.
isn't the chords you play or whether you use certain dynamics or because all music is trying to do that. The first person a good songwriter is trying to manipulate is themselves. You're trying to
Mhm.
create a feeling, you're trying to recreate an experience or an emotion. That's just music. So if you have a problem with that, go Church of Christ and just abandon the whole thing because you know, there's no out there. However, how we frame it can be very problematic. So, and that is where I think we're healthier by looking at how music affects us and seeing that God can work through mechanisms such as biology and neurology, and that God can work through people and markets and cultures and places and get more comfortable with that, then it all gets a little more healthy. The shaman versus shepherd thing is really an illustration of that. I think we have for too long allowed pastors and worship leaders to be too special by half. Like I've at the end of the day, I've never actually believed that as a worship leader, I'm more important than the dentist in the third row.
Yeah. Yeah.
God isn't more and actually funny enough, um, I believe we need to be careful that that dentist in the third row isn't looking to me to deliver God to him that day.
So good.
So good.
I'm not the
Yep.
medium. I'm not the means by which God is delivered to people. And here's another one, actually. Um, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Um, there's this heresy called Donatism. And Donatism was this thing in which the Donatists believed that the delivery of the sacraments was inhibited, that God's ability to work through the Eucharist and communion was inhibited by the sinfulness of the priest. So the idea was that in order to rightly deliver the Eucharist, the priest had to be without sin, had to be, whatever,
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah.
perfect. It's a heresy. We literally looked at this and went, that you cannot map that onto the gospel. And tell me what percentage of worship leaders don't fundamentally believe that if they did something wrong the day before, that their Sunday morning isn't negatively impacted and that God doesn't want to use them in the same way. You tell me how many of those there are, because it's many, 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 and it is fundamentally wrong. And it points to this basic idea that we worship leaders are drawn to the idea that God needs us for his thing to happen. And it's false.
Well, a lot of it is the anointing language that we use. Like,
Yeah.
oh, he or she is just so anointed. Like you hear that all the time. Any even member in the congregation that comes out of a powerful worship experience, oh, they're so anointed. And I think honestly, I think that's why we go to these big tours because maybe we don't say this, but in the back of our minds, we're like, that worship leader is so anointed. If I could just get in the room where they are, displaying their anointing, touch the hem of their garment, then I will be changed. But I think that does a lot of kind of spiritual damage, both to the artist and to
Yeah.
the
It's
people.
good for nobody. It's good
Yeah.
for nobody. It's good for the pocketbook, maybe, but it's not really ultimately good for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, um, I think the more we can, and actually, this is unique, I think, to the Christian marketing category, where we've taken phenomenon that everywhere else we have some other explanation for or some other word for. We use a Christian word for it. Now, why would we do that? Well,
Mhm.
maybe it spiritualizes or baptizes our success and makes our success inevitable. Maybe it comforts us as the person who's succeeded. Maybe
It's
it comforts
manipulation.
me. Well, it is and it isn't. Like we're all doing it if we participate in it. So for me, like I actually got in an argument once with a pretty successful songwriter called one of my songs Anointed. And I said to him, I was like, look, just once I'd love somebody to tell me that a song is supposedly anointed, which was a deep cut nobody ever heard of. Doesn't
Interesting.
happen. Doesn't
Yep.
happen.
Anointing is success.
Anointing is success. Well, what does that reveal theologically about what we believe to be true in the world, right? So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I want to stop, and I hope we all in the worship world can stop borrowing the authority of God and use the words which exist to describe things. If I had an elated, wonderful time in worship that God, through his Holy Spirit, can patiently use to form me and love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, then by all means, I hope God does that. But if I need to borrow God's authority to pay a compliment, then I've got some work to do in like my own worldview, you know?
Yeah.
It should be
Yep.
okay for me to say, I was so moved by that. Thank you. And then for the worship leader to be normal about it and be like, hey, I'm glad it
Thank
meant
you.
something to you. Thank you for the compliment. That's a
Yeah.
normal conversation.
You don't have to say praise the Father, praise the Son.
No, exactly. That is a normal social interaction. And so, like, we've done it on every level. Like, I remember we would get criticized for doing meet and greets. And I was like, of course we're doing meet and greets. We're people. We want to shake their hand and be a human being.
What was the criticism?
The criticism was that we were basically engaging in celebrity culture because people would do
These
autographs.
are your fans.
These are your fans. I'm like, what's worse, meeting them and shaking their hand and learning their name, or being mysterious and out of touch?
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to go for the handshake.
Right.
And so, like, to me, there's a humanizing quality that's badly needed in the entire worship conversation on every level. And that is from the business level all the way down to what we do after an event.
Yeah. Well, it's like the green room culture, it's like we're somewhat special, so we do our thing and we get rushed to the green room, Like that's not what it's about. Like we're human. Like let's talk with people,
Yeah, well, and I think there's two
So,
sides to that too, though, right? Like, if you've got 6 services at your church,
yeah.
expecting your worship team to be visibly present in all 6 services that's performative, if anything is performative.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a little bit of like, what does all of this mean? How does this all work? And that's, I think at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is, I remember what it was like to be 21 and leading worship, to be 16 and leading worship, to read the resources that were given to me. Most of those resources were given to me because a dude wrote a song and didn't go to college. So
Yeah.
like, if he wrote a book because he didn't go to college and wrote a song, and the publishing companies and the song publishing companies are in cahoots, that doesn't mean he knows anything or has anything to say. And so, like, there's this sort of existential crisis that I think creeps up on person after person after person who's in the worship music space long enough and in the local church worship space long enough. And then that language bleeds into the pastorate. And then it's just cultural at that
Yeah.
point. And if there's anything I'm trying to do, it's take the gas out of the bag. It's like, hey, this is important. This is fundamentally important, but not in the ways that we're talking about it. We're talking about it in all the wrong ways. Like,
Yeah.
we're shaping people, we're shaping them holistically, and we are humans doing a human thing together to the glory of God. And that is good. And we need to be allowed to talk about those things in human terms, or we're all going to go crazy eventually. And maybe we're
Oh,
halfway
yeah.
there.
Yeah. We might already be there. At least maybe I'm there, Elias. This is like therapy for me.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
well, the whole shepherd shaman thing, I think, is just so important because when you take yourself too seriously, and we're all prone to that, and we've seen that even in churches around the world, just where abuse can grow in an environment where you feel like you are special, and to a certain degree, you are special as a child of God, but you're not any more special than the church. You're
That's
on
right.
level ground together. And so we need to take what we do
Doing a
seriously, but
job.
not, like not take ourselves so seriously. So I think we need to cut back on some of this like anointing language that we use, because I don't think it forms us in a way that's helpful ultimately.
It's certainly not good for the worship leader. It's good for the
No.
16-year-old trying to find their identity.
Yeah,
But
it's
if
encouraging.
if they're 30 and they still think that way, good luck.
Yeah.
Like, that's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough out there, and you're gonna find a moment where you suddenly are filled with cynicism, I think, and so for me, yeah, we cut back on that language in a big way. And actually, I would say so many of these challenges are about framing. If
Yeah.
we don't participate in the spiritualizing language around industry, then everyone's allowed to participate in a healthier way. We're putting
Yeah.
undue pressure on all sides.
Yeah. Elias, before I let you go, I wanted to just get your take. So I sent out this list to my newsletter. It was sort of a reaction, just sort of like just raw thoughts, Maybe I was a little worked up, and I just want to get your it's kind of like worship industry what ifs, like AKA things that would probably never happen, but like I just want to get your like quick thoughts. Like, hey, would this idea be helpful or hurtful or just dumb? And you can be honest. So, like one of the things I thought of was like, what if we just turned off all the worship industry income streams like for a year? Like,
Sure.
what
Turn
would
off all the
happen if
money.
turned off all the money? Do you think that would be like helpful or hurtful to our worship culture?
Well, I don't think it would do a whole lot. I'll say that.
You
And
don't think
part of
anything
the
would
reason,
change?
well, I mean, it's not like, I mean, I think it would change temporarily. I don't think it would matter in the long run because it's not the issue. Like if you look at how worship music has always been made, there's always some financial quality to that. I mean, the Psalms were written by David. It's not bad to be king financially. We have
Yeah.
we have we have a bunch of worship songs in the Bible from two types of people: paid priests and the king. Like, so so if we're trying to find this like purely pure worship song, totally free of the trappings of money, um, it's going to be hard to find. Even hymnals, hymnals used to be sold door to door by people going to their churches, finding the local Methodist church and selling 80 hymnals. What changed isn't that there was money and infrastructure involved. What changed is how that thing is monetized. We went from monetizing paper to monetizing recordings.
Mhm.
And that played a really, really big role. So I actually don't think it would change a whole lot. I
Yeah.
think it would be a blip in the long span of time. Um, I think how we talk about the money, our transparency around money,
Yeah.
um, those sorts of things could certainly be improved.
Yeah.
But I don't know that turning it off is going to do anything other than make things weird for a little while, and I don't know. I think sustainable opportunity is a good thing.
Yeah.
But how we understand its place in society and our spiritual life is a different question altogether.
I think there can be kind of a gray area with like a worship pastor who, okay, let's say it's a really talented worship pastor and they're thinking, okay, I have two options, two career paths. I could be a local church worship pastor who just kind of leads in my one church, or I could be a songwriter and a couple of my songs take fire and the world sings them and I go on tour, and you sort of compare those two, like, what would you rather do? You know? And so I just think the appearance of, and I get it. Like, not a lot. There are songwriters who are making a great living, but there's a lot who aren't. They're
Yeah,
just faithfully
right.
writing. You know what I mean? But it's just the appearance of it. It's like this industry that I could sort of step into. Well, yeah, I would rather do that. There's more financial gain maybe in that and more notoriety, more fame.
Yeah,
I don't
sure,
know. So,
totally. But I think the reality is that we'd have to stop it. We'd have to change whether or not it's humans who are participating in the thing. Like I don't mean at the market level, at the industry level. I mean at the market level.
yeah,
Like at the end of the day, humans have a minimum or a maximum number of brands they can remember, right?
yeah,
And so we have, I mean, there's a long list of biases we participate in on a daily basis, right? And
yeah,
so certainly access is one of them. The accessibility, availability cascades play into our lives, sure. But we also have a preference for the one or two things we already know that we choose. There's a big way in which Seth Godin's people like us do things like this plays out in our day-to-day subconscious choice making, right?
Mhm.
And so money's a factor, but I actually don't think money is the factor. I think we'll always end up with some group of winners on paper that
Yeah.
end up taking up our attention, and that attention leads to money because we monetize the consumption of the thing now
It's
rather than
just human
creation.
nature, essentially. Like, it's just always gonna
Yeah.
be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I wrote down was minimizing celebrity alliances. Like, you see this a lot, in social media, like, and I get it. Like, if you're a songwriter and you can align yourself with some other massive brands, like, I know there's other songwriters out there, "Man, I would love to write with so and so," or, "I would love to be in the room with this," and it's like, well, and I know I get it, like, these high profile people and movements, like, you can't just write songs with everybody. But I feel like that there's an opportunity there to encourage songwriting at the local level where these bigger names could utilize their platform in a way that's kind of serving local church songwriters more. Agree, disagree, helpful, hurtful?
Yes, I mean, both, I would say. Like, um, first of all, I would guess that that's happening more often than people might think already.
Yeah, yeah,
So again, back to the availability question. It's like just because we didn't hear it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
yeah,
So the question isn't, are these writers trying to write with a whole bunch of people? And some of them, it may be true that over time they do less and less of it and they write more and more with their friends. And it worked last time. Why wouldn't it work this time? And so on. But it's
right.
also true that some of those people got into those rooms by being the unknown guy that wrote with somebody 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So this has kind of been happening. So
Yeah,
again, I point back to the like, I don't know that we can assume that unknown writers aren't writing with people. In fact, if you look at what we did with Worship Leader Research with the songwriters chart just recently, you can see there's all kinds of people whose names you don't know who are part
yep,
of these publishing engines in the CCLI top 25 and top 100. And so
yep,
those people are there. We're just not seeing them and we're not remembering them and we're not noticing them.
yep,
And so the celebrity alliance part of it, to me, yes, it's happening, and yes, it's probably happening strategically, but that is also evidence of like I think it's more at least as true that we're noticing it because we have two familiar names now instead of one or none.
yeah, yep,
So more, the first 100 people see it, the first 90 people acknowledge it. Well, any algorithm's going to push that to the front.
yeah. Do you think, and this is another one, like movements just helping other churches? I feel like there's just everybody's trying to really push their brand, which I don't blame them for that. Like, what are you
I
gonna
mean,
do?
you
Like,
do
that's
it, I do it. Yeah.
yeah, we're all doing that. But if is there a way, and maybe this is happening and it's just not as visible, for us to use that energy in a way that's more investing into the body of Christ and raising up worship leaders rather than just entertaining them.
Yeah. I mean, so I wouldn't draw the contrast to entertainment probably would be
Okay.
one thing. Like I would not go there. But I do think that the incentives are what they are because of the medium. So once upon a time, the mission statement of all of these big churches included resourcing the local church. And the
Yep.
reason was the money made that worthwhile, frankly. I mean, that's not the only reason. There was probably really good, healthy reasons that started it all out. And at some point, the fact that publishing was a major monetization tool was a major component, right? But
Right.
now you've got monthly revenues from streaming. You've got major benefits financially from streaming if you're on the masters. I know there's a lot of talk of people paying low payouts for streaming and stuff like that. The truth is, if you own the masters, streaming can be great, right? And so
Yep.
the incentives moved. And so now with the combination of multi-tracks and streaming, of course Bethel's going to focus on making a new Bethel record because the incentives all moved towards the recording and releasing of recordings, like the making of music rather than the writing of music. And they keep writing new songs because it all factors in. And so it's just complicated, I guess is the best way to put it. For Bethel Church to prop up a local church in terms of what they're set up to do, I don't know what that would even look like. You know what I mean?
Right.
It,
Yeah.
the whole system would have to be completely different. And so I think what ends up happening is you get a lot of churches that then go, okay, well, then we're going to be the next insert Big Four church name. We're going to be, and you probably can think of 5 right now that are that junior version trying to be visible,
Yeah.
and some of them are succeeding at it, right?
Yep.
And so I don't know. I think the thing for me is that the market at that level is a lot more reactive than proactive.
Yeah.
The executives in music are constantly on the lookout for what the next thing is, and they're looking to the people, like the market, to see what it's going to be. Like,
Yeah.
so popular music is a lagging indicator, always. In the same way that high fashion will tell you what was popular in the poorer neighborhoods 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Music is the same way. So
Yep.
I think it's tough. It's not to say it's inevitable, but it really does start at the ground level, because that's what everyone's watching. All anyone's doing is looking at their analytics and trying to figure out what the next trend is going to be. That's all they're all doing. So the easiest way to make a trend is to start doing those things instead of worrying about whether we have access to the upper echelons.
Yeah. No, it's good. And a couple of these we already hit on. So like worship tours
Yeah.
and concerts, like I
Yeah.
don't think it's like we need to cancel all of this, but hey, clear lines.
Yeah.
Let's call it what it is. I think that will be helpful
this
for
ain't
people in
church.
processing it. This isn't church, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you're invested in a local church.
Yeah.
And then minimizing multi-tracks, we kind of hit on that. Like, hey, we don't have to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a helpful tool, but hey, let's not be so overly reliant on it.
Yes.
What would you say, Elias, and we'll kind of wrap up with this,
Sure.
for churches that would like to explore more kinds of worship music? Like, hey, they might say we're locked into the Big Four. We take all of our songs from there. What would you say as a recommendation for, and feel free to even plug your own music here. Like, hey, here's some
Well,
other alternatives if you're looking for great worship music that you want that's a little more maybe underground.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I mean, sure. I'm out there writing it. Look me up, look up City Harmonic, whatever. There's lots of bands like that and lots of artists like that. Right. And so if you're looking for, I don't know, I feel like that is a really tough job. Like, there is more music being released than ever before every single week. There's more
Yeah.
worship music being released every single week. It's a practically impossible task to know where to look, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is that the streaming platforms that we listen to, in fact, Daniel Ek is the CEO of Spotify. So back in, I think it was 2017, in a shareholders meeting, he shared that he believed, and he's right, that Spotify is in control of the demand curve. In other words, Spotify, for the first time, is both where we consume music and where we discover music.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't true of radio. Radio, we used to hear it on the radio and go buy the album.
Right.
Right. So the store was where we consumed music, and the house was where we consumed music. The store was where we got music, and the radio was where we discovered music. Right. So now discovery and consumption are happening at the same time.
Yep.
Right. So if we really want to find new worship music, we start by some concentrated, and this works on Spotify, less so on other platforms, but on Spotify, it's like literally just go on an aggressive binge. Go listen to a bunch of worship music that's different than what you're used to and see what's served to you. Another good little trick is try to make a playlist. Find a couple of, and this is Spotify specific again, find a couple of artists that you like who are outside off the beaten path, and add them to a playlist and see what Spotify recommends you add.
Interesting.
Because there are algorithmic clicks there. Now, nothing competes with asking actual people what they actually think. So like real world conversations go a long way in this regard and can be very surprising. But the truth is, those are fewer and fewer and fewer when it comes to music. So I've often found participating in some of the big, like, say, Facebook groups or whatever around worship music can be a great place to start in getting some
Yep.
recommendations and putting in the time. But but I fully recognize that that is not a thing most worship pastors have much of. So
Yep.
it's a tough
Right.
challenge. It's
What's
hard out
this?
there.
Yeah. What's a song of yours, Elias, that you love leading in corporate worship? And then what's a song that you haven't written that you're leading a lot these days?
Oh man, a song of mine. I mean, it was a popular enough song in its own right. So there's a song called Enough that people really respond to, and I love getting that. I mean, of course, Manifesto, Holy Wedding Day, the songs that we wrote back in the day. Um, and it's funny, there's a song I have called Expectation that wasn't terribly successful commercially, but I, you know, will shoehorn it into set lists because I think what it does theologically is helpful. And I
Yeah.
think what it does emotionally is helpful. And so I put it in the set list in a particular place to sort of set the tone and do a thing, and it works really, really well for me in that
Yep.
setting. Um, and I'm drawn to when it comes to like leading songs that aren't mine. I mean, I do I do play a lot of the big songs. I do,
Yep.
you know? But probably one that I'll go to and for reasons that are complicated in terms of is probably like John Millen's King of My Heart. It's
Mm.
there's
Yep.
a lot. I think there's some complexity in what's happening lyrically, even if it's subtle, that I think is healthy and needed. Um, yeah, I think there's so much good stuff out there. Our church has this like super wide variety of songs that we play, probably too wide, really. Um, but
Yeah.
but like, and I'm not in charge of songs. So I'm just a guy who leads worship there, and chooses my set
Right.
list and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's like some, you know, uh, I think it's called like Blue Collar, something. I think Andy Squires co-wrote on it. Great song.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, but so there's a few different things like that that all kind of sneak in, but yeah, it's. I don't think it's about who wrote the songs at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think at the local church level, it really comes down to like how are we playing this in a way that's ours.
Yeah.
That's what folk music is. Folk music isn't an individual making a song that we happen to like. Folk music is music of the people. And so if liturgy is the work of the people, then probably our worship music should be the work of the people, you
Yeah.
know? And so
Yep.
even if we're not generating songs, even if we're doing a liturgy of sorts that came from somewhere else, at the end of the day, how are we contextualizing it? How is it ours beyond the fact that we happen to be the ones singing it?
Right. Yeah. It's so good. Bro, thanks for chatting today. And I know these are like challenging, weird things to talk about, but I feel like I learned from you today. And,
Oh, well, thanks, man. It's always a blast talking to you.
I, and I know that maybe some of our listeners are like, man, Dave's getting a little spicy. Like, I love the local church. I love worship music. Like, seriously, man, just I cut my teeth on like Tim Hughes and Matt
Yeah,
Redman and Paul Balash
same.
and like these. I'm really grateful for what an industry, even though it was different back then, has provided for me in my development as a leader. So, but I feel like these are important things for us to wrestle with so we can continue to become a more kind of biblically centered, saturated movement and have healthy local
Mhm.
churches. So
Yeah, totally.
appreciate you, man. Any last words? Anything you want to like leave our listeners with today before we go?
Man, at the end of the day, if I had to pick something, I think it's okay to be human. It's okay to, as a worship leader, as a worshiper, God made you a human being. He gave you a body. He doesn't regret that. And, the empty tomb means that Jesus has a body. The Trinity means that Jesus is God. And so there's something to be said for the fact that, like, you're an embodied creature. So when it comes to healthy worship has to be something which engages us as embodied creatures, not something which expects us to pretend we aren't. And I
Mm,
think that's true on every level. How we relate to one another, how we relate to our people, how we relate to the culture around us, all of it. We're creatures of the earth, and that's okay, good. And I think we need to start there in worship conversations in a big way.
So good. Drop that mic, Elias. That's
I can't. It's
mic
tied
drop
to this
moment.
thing. It'd be a whole ordeal. Actually.
And I gotta say, any of our listeners, dude, your Say It Dumber videos are just always so good, so well produced, dude. You kind of do all that yourself? Do you have a team that
Yeah, we're all in house. Yeah.
Oh man, it's so good. So
Thanks,
keep
man.
doing what
Yeah.
you're doing, man. Thanks for all that you do, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Likewise.